Welcome to yet another episode of the Net Podcast. I am Dave, and joined today by the usual cohort of co-hosts, Mr. Salisbury, Mr. Nato, and Mr. Mestry. And we have the absolute privilege today of being joined by a former colleague of mine and a very nice guy, Mr. Christopher Young. Chris, how are you doing?
I am doing awesome. It's a little bit of a time machine here, and that feels like yesterday we were in Barcelona having jamón ibérico at, various things, or Vegas, and
Yes,
watching
please.
various people slide down large banisters in the bottom of casinos. And yeah, we're all suddenly got older. The hell happened, guys?
Yeah, it's only been like a decade or so. Time flies when you're having fun.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Well, welcome to the show anyway.
So in that decade, Chris, when we last worked together was at HP in the very early days of SDN. What have you been working on since? How's your journey been?
So wow, yeah, that would have been like 2011, 2012. To date it, I think you and I got excited about the OpenFlow 1.3 spec coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and everybody's
Oh, I
going,
remember that one.
What's OpenFlow? Well, you guys know what OpenFlow is, but all the kids these days.
I implemented
So
1.3. It was kind of fun at the time.
it was. There was a lot of really cool stuff. There was a lot of cool internal stuff, which I think we're still sworn to NDA about that we can't really talk about, that never came to fruition. So what have I done since then? Wow. So I went as a TME, technical marketing engineer, for a while, focused on some network management stuff, and to this day, I will still stand and die on the hill of SNMP is not going to go away. It'll be there forever. It'll be cockroaches, Twinkies, and SNMP at the end of time.
Yes, sir.
Different problems for different problem statements, different solutions, right? I then did a stint around product management, brought a really cool product to almost market, of which got actually killed because we announced an acquisition the day that it was supposed to be released, and had all of the wonderful resources, marketing, and everything else removed. So that was an opportunity for growth, is how I'm characterizing it these days. There was some beverages involved and some tears of sorrow.
More
But you move on.
therapy. Yep.
Beverage therapy. Yep.
It was a little beverage therapy, and no, actually, I got mad for a couple of days and went, and embraced the new opportunity at that point, right?
Well, like how often has that happened to all of us? I mean, it's like.
Yeah, exactly, right? You just
you were just mentioning the younger folks who are getting involved in this. My oldest son is going to be a senior in computer science soon, and it's the same sort of thing. We've been talking about it, and I'm like, get ready, strap in for the rocket ride, because it's what you're going to tell everybody right now. I mean, it's very non-linear, is what I say.
There is still, there's the IMC product. There's one product that has a little special place in my heart, and after that, I let it go. I let it move on. It's out of the house. It's shacking up with questionable people and making questionable life choices at this point. I don't know. I don't look anymore. But other than that, I've gone almost pure mercenary at this point. Like, what's next,
Mm-hmm.
right? Decisions are not mine to make. I can't make financing decisions or marketing decisions, and just kind of come with what's next and look for the next interesting problem.
That's an interesting kind of like revelation. I mean, I had kind of a train wreck after a couple of gigs ago myself, and kind of came to a similar kind of place. It was more like, well, you're not going to work anywhere for 10 years anymore. Forget it. I mean, that's rare. And really just focus on working with as much as you can, good people and working on good stuff, and the rest, you know, whatever, you know,
Well, is this
whatever
Yeah.
happens, right?
open source too, like, to some extent, and working with people across companies, and you get to work.
Open source has been cool too because it kind of glued us all together. I mean, we've all worked together. Not Chris,
That's
sorry,
right.
with me, but the other folks that are here, we've all worked together multiple times now, bumping in and out of open source things and so on. I mean, it's been an interesting glue that's kind of. It used to be like kind of the ITF used to be that place, would glue together people, you know, between gigs. You know, it would survive past gigs, you know, and. Open source has become that kind of thing now, anyway, at least for me. Interesting, though, that you said that, Chris.
Yeah, it's I think open source has kind of been the thing that you know internally, like I can tell you, and I will can name no names, but it was well known that you would select who you sent to different projects based on whether you wanted the project to fail or succeed. And there
Yeah,
was certain individuals that you could send to certain working groups
blow
if
the
you
thing
wanted to
up.
derail the whole thing,
Yeah, yeah. And
which,
it's like
you
that
know,
at
when
open source. It's just a little different, right? It's similar, you know.
yeah, but it is the same, but it's different, right? You have a little bit more. It's harder to do that in closed doors than it is out in the open, which is when open
I don't
source
know.
I think is done.
We saw that on a previous project. The four of us, you know, the Open Daylight project, just to put it
Oh
out
yeah,
there. There were some bad actors in there, both at the beginning and then throughout the process.
I'm aware. I know the names.
And
Yes,
yeah, and so I mean, it
yes.
still happens, but you're right. I guess it's maybe less overt because it's like the group has to be building something or it doesn't work. The group can't be
I
busy derailing stuff, you know, or it doesn't. It's not just paperwork, basically. It's building, right? Maybe that's
there's a
what's
part of
different.
me that
It's
sits
like
there over
it's
beers
where
and
meritocracy goes wrong, right? Like
yeah.
Yeah,
the whole thing that no matter like how much of a piece of shit you are, as long as you contribute code and it's good code, quality code, that it's like you
well, to
walk
an
on water.
extent. Now that's not being tolerated either. I mean, there's a line there too,
Yeah,
right? Where we've
but
seen
but it takes a while to get to that line.
it does. I mean, you got to be pretty flagrantly, out of bounds. We'll just say, right? Dave
Oh,
disagrees.
no, I was going to say, I think there's a difference between the open source of now and the open source of a decade ago. When we were doing ODL,
Yep,
things like
definitely.
code of conduct didn't really exist or weren't very heavily
It was
enforced.
kind of new. It was a new thing.
It was a new
For
thing,
most of
right?
us, it was new. Yeah.
And now, like when we just recently did a podcast with Lisa Kaywood, and like now we have OSPOs, and we have people that understand like what communities need and what
Open
sort of
source program offices for people who don't know what OSPO is.
and what type of governance you need, and how you can make sure that those bad actors aren't gatekeeping and stopping people from contributing, and poisoning the project, and ways of trying to manage that. I think we're getting into a better space, or I'd like to believe the optimist in me says that we're getting towards that better place now.
We are, but there are new projects that are still being created using the wrong methodology. I mean, there's I've seen one very recently. I won't name it yet, but it's being formed in the similar kind of thing. Like it's a pay to play thing or disguised as a pay to play thing, and that's kind of what Brent was saying. Like if the rules don't work right, then we'll have problems. But you know,
Yeah,
it's
you're just gonna
you
tease
know
it and not throw it out there, huh?
Oh,
yeah.
damn
I mean, it's better and it's worse. I don't know. Maybe we've just been doing this too long.
Well, I think so. But before we go down that rabbit hole too far of doom and gloom, let's ask Chris what he's been working on recently. What are you working on now, Chris?
So after doing the internal thing for a while, which I couldn't talk about in any way, shape, or form, I had that content creator kind of itch, and I got into the smart home side of things, right? And
Ooh,
so I started doing,
Cool.
taking, way back, I was doing a YouTube channel internally. That's actually how I got into a TME gig, because the TME responsible for it at the time kind of didn't produce content, and I started getting questions from everybody. So it was just, how do I make myself more efficient? I was just ruthless. Like, I can't answer the same question 90 times. I can't be on everybody's call. So I did YouTube and I gained those skills. And then I kind of said, how do I bridge that, use those skills to get somebody else to pay for the smart home stuff? Because I tend to not do things halfway.
Oh, that's cool. Well, somebody's got to build things.
Well, and a
In
couple
that
years later,
department,
yeah, like a couple years later, I've got 8,000 plus subs on YouTube, and a check that comes in every month that gives me a little bit of YouTube ad-aware money to just throw at whatever the next project is, and
Oh,
a
that's
family who
cool.
puts up with
Why
lights that
haven't we
mostly
done
turn.
that? We should look into that.
I don't think we quite have 8,000 subscribers. Note
Yeah.
to those watching this on YouTube, click the subscribe button.
Ring that
And
bell.
smash that like button gently.
You'll be notified when new content is loaded. Yes. Yeah, it's networking, right? It's the amount of like 8,000. I don't know if there's 8,000 people who like networking. Like sometimes it feels like that at this point.
Or don't know that they should like networking. We talked about this a couple episodes ago with some folks about how there, and back to OpenFlow. I mean, this is a good rewind back to that, the whole clean slate thing and all that, and then and another example of that were the early days of Kubernetes, where people wanted to just say, no, networking is there and I don't care and it's fine and it just works. And how many times do we have to see that movie to realize that's just a folly, no matter how hard you try, it's there.
The fallacies of distributed computing was what, like 1996?
Yeah.
And then probably almost like clockwork, it's actually about time for it to come back up again. But it comes back up every 2 or 3 years, and a whole new generation of people go, oh my Lord, like, you mean latency is a real thing and the network's like, it's not stable?
Yeah. I mean, I have a theory, this will resonate with Brent, that the shitty coverage of broadband is part of the problem. People don't appreciate what you can actually do. It was a guy yesterday on Nanog who literally, like, I could not believe this. He said, what would anybody do with a gig of bandwidth? I can't imagine what. I'm like, well, maybe you need to work somewhere else, because you just said something that's been said repeatedly over time. Way back to Bill Gates' famous thing about, whatever that was, 32K of memory or whatever. I mean, like, really? We're going to keep challenging why we need more of this kind of stuff? And the other thing that's been interesting is, remember, like, through time, we've noodled around with different types of networking. But a lot of it comes back down to, like, it's basically got to work. It's got to get you from here to there to begin with. And then there's other things, but it's not going away. So I argue that maybe more people should be interested in this than less at this point.
Well, I think it's fundamentally what's the problem statement of networking? Like, we get wrapped around protocol design a lot, but at this point in my career, there's, the Zen master in me is like, there's no difference in choosing how I get to Chicago versus how I route packets between A to B, between how I make a phone call. It's all just path selection, addressing, target, and choosing how I'm going to get there. Like, fundamentally, that's all of it is all the same thing. And I think there is a am I a BGPist? Like, oh my Lord, like, you're using OSPF.
Right.
Like, I unapologetically, I've used RIP.
Right.
On purpose.
You can run RIP at home. It's okay.
Yeah. Like, and honestly, to tie it back to the smart home space, RIP is back.
Yeah. Yeah. For
RIP
small networks, it works fine. When you.
For large networks.
And even larger networks, right? I mean, there are measurable limits that we've figured out where things
if you look.
But wait, did Cisco invent IGRP to replace RIP because it didn't work in?
Yeah, well, that's.
Have you guys heard of Thread at all?
Yeah. Exactly.
So Thread, which is IPv6 over 802.15.4 radios, so Zigbee radios.
Yep.
Right? So it's IPv6, which means now we've got a common network layer, which means we can build common applications on top of it. And these are all essentially your light bulbs are being routers. So it's not
Yep.
like they can do computationally intensive routing tables and calculations in a light bulb. So they just do basic distance vector. It's freaking RIP. It's RIP
See,
NG.
this is an interesting example too of like how networking has progressed, just like computing, but everybody forgets because computing is the shiny penny, right? Ooh, it doubles every whatever, right?
Yeah.
Think about this example too. Like I actually this used to be called mano networking, or there were a bunch of other iterations through time. Like the IETF was working on this for a while. And the primary use case, I still remember this. This is like 15 years ago, 12 years ago, was around movable systems that could be routers, and they were, these were military applications was a primary kind of example. But nobody ever thought about like, how about the 100 light bulbs in your house, right? I mean, that's freaking awesome that we can do that now in a light bulb, But it's basically the similar kind of thing. Back to why networking is actually interesting. It's just maybe you're not looking at it the right way or something. I don't know.
And this is where I think it's interesting because I've got that smart home side of me, and then of course I've got the grumpy networking engineer part of me. And I see the smart home people going, no, you don't understand the standard that hasn't been released yet, that hasn't been ratified yet, that is still in closed doors where we haven't actually seen anything. It's going to do all of these things because the marketing people said so.
Yeah, well.
To which I'm kind of like, that's nice, guys. I've got 20, 25 years of watching this stuff happen and being involved in the making of said goo. So although I will, cautiously optimistic, can we stop with the hyperbole just a little bit, please? Like, let's wait and see.
Part of that's been around, the whole IoT space, though. It for a while, remember, it was the shiny penny too, right? It was, ooh, we have cloud stuff now. We've run out of stuff. Oh, IoT, right? IoT, and then, but by the way, IoT back to networking, right? And run your networking properly, and that's all of the kind of the home net activities that have been out there have been trying to figure that out. But one interesting thing you'd said is, it's for home users. You can run BGP, but nobody needs to know. It needs to work on its own, basically, right? It needs to be capable of the average home user using it, plugging it in, and that's kind of where things started. When did HomeNet at the IETF start? Like, it was like 12 years ago or something too. But I remember going to those meetings and people just shouting about, like, you can't dumb it down like this. This is, like, well, how do you think the majority of people are going to use this? The people that are in this room are all network geeks. We all know how to set this up. But like, you go to your parents' house, what are they going to do with this? They're going to call you to fix it.
Turn it on. It's got to be secure. Put in the S in IoT.
Yeah.
There's that little joke, but there's even Thread, like this interoperable networking layer that's supposed to be multi-vendor. And then what happens? It's the same old. I will try not to use bad words, but it's Apple comes out Thread. It's awesome, right? It is completely 100% Thread compatible. Google is 100% Thread compatible. Eero is 100% Thread compatible. 100%. We're clear on that. Like, total standards based. Yeah, they just don't share the passwords.
Right.
So there is no ability, at least right now, today, as of the recording of this podcast, to be able to share the commissioning key between an Apple network and a Google Home Hub Max and an Eero. So you end up in this situation where everything is 100%. It's freaking Trill all over again. Yeah, everybody is standards based and nobody can talk to each other.
Oh God, not Trill. Not Trill.
Not the Shrill.
It's a Trill. Oh my God. There's probably like Serenity one person out there that knows what that is. That's amazing. So like, what is kind of the state of home? So I don't know much about home networking as far as like home automation and things like that. So like, kind of lay out, where would I even get started? Why would I do it? Is it just IoT for home? And then maybe go into, I'm kind of curious about this. This is the first time I've heard about this network that apparently all the vendors are doing, but nobody's able to talk to each other. What's that all about?
So IoT in general, like, this is still all the X10 stuff that, like, it's all that stuff that's been available for years and years and years. And a lot of it is just the Bill Gates house that we all kind of saw as kids growing up with, pictures on the walls that change as people come in the room, presence detection. The grumpy dad, to some degree, it's like, I don't have to worry about my kids turning off lights. I'm never going to, I don't want to become my parents, and I'm not going to be yelling at them like, gosh darn kids,
That is
didn't
one
turn
of
the
the
lights off
reasons
again.
why I put in motion sensors for all of our lights.
Yeah,
I got annoyed at walking around and going, why are the lights still on? You're
leaving
right.
power on and all those kinds of things. So there's a very real, like, practical application of it, but there's also like, how far can you push that stuff, which the nerd in me kind of takes on, right? So I've got things like I did an energy challenge that, like, how much can I save? And the thing is all this stuff, because it's always connected and always on, it's always doing vampire draws and always connected to Wi-Fi.
Yep.
And so I kind of looked at it and said, how can I turn things off? But you can't just turn things off. You've got to do this in an intelligent way, because you don't want to be don't turn lights off when people are in the bathroom. They get annoyed when you do that, just in case anybody's unclear.
We had a few of
Might
those
be funny,
experiments.
but don't do that. So I kind of went through and started, like, when you start looking at all the instrumentation, and this kind of ties back to the net management stuff, right? Everything that's available to us. We have presence detectors. We have different kinds of presence detectors. You have PIR, so infrared motion. You have full radar. I can do things like look at my son's phone and see whether he's connected on my network or not, right? Or has he been connected for a certain amount of time? So when he leaves the house, his entire bedroom, just all the power just shuts off in it. I've got in a pandemic, I've got my girlfriend who lives here. Like, it's girlfriend because we're not married, but we've been together for enough years that we're all in the same house, and it's a Brady Bunch. But sometimes she's home and sometimes she's not. So I had to figure out, how do I know whether or not she's home? And she doesn't always wear her watch, and the phone may or may not be here. So I actually took computer vision, so like the OpenCV2 project, and counted the number of vehicles in my driveway.
That's what I was going to say, like the
That's
Nests
cool.
do that, or they tried to do that, and it got a little too clever for its own good. And they needed something like that to say, wait a minute, her phone is actually accidentally was left in my car. She's not here. It's that kind of weirdness, that.
You can get into full Bayesian probability depending on the project you're in. So you can take the check if her watch is here, check if her phone is here, check if there's presence upstairs at a certain point in time, combined with the fact that there's two cars in the driveway, like all of those things all together.
Yep.
And take that in if you so choose, right? That takes a special kind of person to go to that length.
You're
But
like the ultimate
that's what it takes
violator
to make this
of
work right.
privacy. It's amazing.
But that's
So,
amazing.
so is there a platform? So like when you're talking about this, obviously there's some code involved. Like, is there a platform for each of them? Like, is it all vendor specific, or is there one kind of universal platform at the moment?
So you've got, in the consumer grade space, which stuff kind of works, right? I wouldn't say it just works, but it kind of works. You've got Apple HomeKit, you've got Google, you've got Amazon, right? As kind of the three
If it's
major
from the
platforms.
same vendor, it usually works.
Well, so Amazon and Google kind of did this mostly cloud-based thing where they will do cloud-to-cloud integrations. So the vendor writes an SDK and their specific devices talk to their specific cloud. There's an abstraction layer in the cloud that allows Amazon to access any light bulb as a light bulb, right? And it's that the middleware, the glue code.
That's what I found. That kind of works. Like with HomeKit, I have different kinds of switches here. And initially, maybe they must have fixed this because now it works right. But it's kind of what you're saying. Like, they just weren't integrated right, and there were a bunch of weird corner cases. Like, if you had everything installed and it worked, and then like your power went out and one of the switches got screwed up or whatever, getting it back into the network of whatever was set up, that's where it went haywire for me.
HomeKit's a little bit different because HomeKit is local control.
Yep.
But they're doing local control over MDNS, but they were using originally Bluetooth, which when it was first came out was, I think, still Bluetooth 3. So Bluetooth 3 was really slow. So you could have a motion detector that was Bluetooth based, which was good from a battery perspective. But by the time it actually woke up, got on the network, sent the message that something had happened, and then decided to turn on the light bulb, you were already through the hallway and into the kitchen.
It was too late. Yeah.
So like that's kind of useless. So there's like the commercial side of things for more of the kind of the prosumer side of things. Funny enough, I went into Home Assistant and there's a few options there. Some of them are like, I think OpenHab is Java based. My Ansible days and Jinja templates are like, that's what got me into Home Assistant, because it's all Python. So I can put and write my own code to be able to do interesting things. And the entire templating language is all Jinja.
Let me ask you about that. That's an interesting adventure or rabbit hole I've gone down, and a bunch of my friends have done this. And I got to say, like about 75%, including myself, have returned back to the prosumer non-hacked versions of these things. Setting these things up. Originally, I set up like a Zigbee network at home, to do some of the automation and controls. And the Zigbee network is not the most reliable network protocol that you could ever use. I mean, there's massive loss, at least how it was implemented here. And so kind of what you were saying, Chris, like you'd say, turn the light on, and you'd have to count to like 20 before the bulb would come on, or whatever the controls were. And what ended up happening, I mean, there was some weird unsynchronization event that happened, and I had all of these things automated and coded. I was using Ansible, I think, at the time for this, and just abject like collapse of functionality, and then like 3 hours later, after I had fixed everything, it all worked again, and I said, I'm not doing this again. Like, I need my light bulbs to work. So I guess that's part of one of the question I'm teasing out here is this viable today still, or is it?
So Zigbee to say Zigbee means nothing, in my opinion, right? I don't even know how many different variations of Zigbee.
That's part of the problem, I think, right? It's compatibility.
Yeah. There's the compatibility. Zigbee within individual vendors was generally, you had to be within the same vendor for the same hub. There's a lot of like guardrails that people.
The Philips light bulbs wouldn't work with, I can't remember who others, Zigbee hub. And I ended up going through a bunch of those, that whole adventure.
There are some hubs that don't support light bulbs at all. Like the Aqara hubs for the longest time only did, you would be a Hue hub for your lights. And then you had to be like an Aqara hub if you wanted contact sensors, and motion sensors kind of go in between, and it was kind of a nightmare. And you also
it's advertised as working for everything, but it didn't. Like my light, right? Like my wall
it works for everything as long as you bought everything from us, and it was that
from
definition.
The same vendor, right?
Yes.
That's what I mean. Like the light switches wouldn't work with the Hue controller. Exactly. That's what happened. Like my bulbs worked fine.
And that's what HomeKit and Amazon and Google were supposed to kind of fix that issue.
Yeah, it was supposed to string it all together, right? Make it work seamlessly from one place, but kind of.
Well, so speaking of the HomeKit, so I don't know, Chris, if you've looked at the GitHub project HomeBridge, which is essentially a Node.js server that you can then write plugins for HomeKit for things that weren't meant to work with HomeKit. I use that to control this interesting device, which I got on Amazon, probably from China, that could, send infrared, right? So you could control like an old stereo receiver that obviously doesn't have Ethernet or anything on it, but you just need to send commands to, and it worked out really slick. So have you done anything with that?
I have. HomeBridge is one of those. So if you go HomeKit, you go HomeKit because it's secure, because it's all local, right? So if those are the reasons that you went HomeKit, it seems a little silly to me to go to an open source project where you have questionable contributors throwing in plugins that are, for the most part, actually going to be accessing things from the cloud using cloud APIs, because they're just rewriting that. Like, I make no judgment on what people do. No, but
you're right. And in
I know
fact, this is where I wanted to go because what I noticed
when Apple people, hold on a second, Kyle, it's going to shock you, but Apple people, sometimes they get on a high horse.
I'm
right?
shocked.
And then they pull this.
Impossible.
Like, Apple HomeKit is because of this, and I've got all this HomeBridge stuff. Sorry.
No, the HomeBridge, you're right. And what I noticed, so I did this, and because I had this old receiver, specifically I wanted to control, but what I noticed through my Pi-hole setup was I started to notice, I'm like, the heck are all of these like DNS requests for these bizarre Chinese domains and stuff? And I narrowed it down to that that stupid thing I had bought on Amazon was like basically being controlled by something in China.
Else.
And I started to and eventually, now it turns out it did not need internet access to do what I needed it to do. So in my case, I just blocked it from getting outside of my home network. But eventually I got rid of it for the exact reason you just talked about, where like, what is this thing doing? I don't know what it's doing. It's all TLS, right? So I can't inspect what's going on inside of it. So yeah.
And most of these things give you absolutely no ability to affect the cryptographic store of the device. So you can't use Charles proxy to do any reverse engineering or any of those other kinds of things. Yeah. Rabbit holes I've gone down.
Exactly.
Yeah, back to the security part of IoT, why my stuff runs on a very special network that can do very limited things.
Yeah, I've split mine into separate. I've got a complete broadcast domain VLAN separate Wi-Fi.
It has to be its own VLAN, exactly. Like for people that are listening, this is important. Like what Kyle's example is a good example of why you do this. Like that device that it may or may not, be compromised or whatever, is now running on your LAN where everything else is available, and that's where you can suddenly get into trouble. If you isolate it away, it's only the IoT devices. In fact, I try to keep the IoT devices away from each other too. That's another thing kind of what you were saying, Chris. The like brands work together, the dislike, but not with the other kids. And maybe they work together up in the cloud, which is fine. They're on different VLANs, but they can't see each other.
It's even if you're not really compromised, because that's like the bad connotation of those words, right?
Yep.
All this stuff generally works from a user perspective nowadays by getting on to a device, onto a network, and then broadcast/multicasting out an MDNS address for workability. So by its very nature, they instantly know every device that you've got going on in your home network.
Yep.
Right, which is now I can tell you that I personally happen to be responsible for Philips Hue fixing their MDNS code, because there's a point where you get enough MDNS packets thrown at a bridge and it just falls over and dies. So give them back to the community.
Thanks, Chris.
But that kind of brings us, to your question, Brent, around like what's next, right? Is we build out all these cloud abstraction layers, right, to be able to tie all these devices together. And then they kind of figured out, well, a lot of companies didn't really factor in when they're selling a consumer device, what is the ongoing cloud cost? So if I sell a light bulb for $30 and I have to now support, EC2 instances for the next 10 years for that light bulb, what is that cloud cost going to cost me over the long term?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I got like, what happens if that person never upgrades, right? What is the from a supportability perspective, what can I expect? And they kind of went, well, this sucks, and it sucks for everybody. So in, I think, 2018, 2019, they came out with this wonderful, QXKCD comic around standards here, this wonderful new standard that's going to fix all of this stuff called Project CHIP or CHOIP, which was supposed to be released in 2020 and then was pushed back for reasons. And then was pushed back again for reasons and pushed back for reasons, eventually rebranded to Matter. And what is, like, see if any of this sounds familiar, what's magical about this is it runs over an IP-based network, right? So we've now abstracted away the application layer protocol away from the networking protocol. So the Zigbee thing, the Zigbee radios run on 802.15.4, which is a low bandwidth radio, physical IEEE layer 802.15.4. Yep. And Zigbee was the protocol on top of that, which now has kind of moved into this thing called Thread, which is now IP based on that radio with this specific routing protocol. All these things are full meshed, automatically negotiate if they're within the same thread network, and they're capable of being a router. You can have something like 30 thread routers in a thread domain, and they will negotiate that. They will figure out who the thread border router is, which think frame relay days. It's a gateway between dissimilar media. Like it's all the stuff that all of us have been dealing with for the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah,
and
just on a small scale.
It is now Well, small scale, but
Well, I
I
mean,
think it's like
a small form factor, not
small
scale.
form factor. And that's the really interesting thing is I
Yeah.
was also in heavily in that data center space and the BGP, and it must be EVPN and VXLAN and must be symmetrical IRB, don't do asymmetrical IRB, like all of these, like I was that guy and then went, wait a minute, the entire problem statement all changed. And now I'm like, they're using RIP. That's brilliant. And how many times, like Dave, have you heard me say, friends don't let friends use RIP? Like, come on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now I'm like, I'm sorry. That's a real Canadian. I'm sorry.
But I guess what's funny is that they're now like taking all of this older networking stuff, which we'd all written off years ago, like being reinstated, which is brilliant. But the entire home networking space solve problems that we can't even get right in the freaking data center, like zero-touch provisioning and stuff. Like all of that in the home is just great. Plug in a light bulb, plug in another light bulb, all the light bulbs talk to each other and work.
Right. Or they, I just installed another, Nest smoke detector, and like you're saying, they just chain themselves together. You need to associate with one, and then it learns all the keys and everything else it needs to know. And
So they're
voila.
Nest is using thread under the covers. That's part of how that works.
Yep.
And it's just magic. And
it is. Well, I mean, it is for like, and I know how this stuff works, but I don't care either. I want to install the damn smoke detector and get on with my day is what the thing is, And
that's kind
but
of
you're right. It's like it is quite cool because 10 years ago installing these things, you'd have to go each one, do the whole thing, the provisioning thing, like Dave was saying, the data center today. And these things now, they're like chiclets, you just boop, 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 and they all kind of provision themselves, which is the way it should be.
The problem, the reason we can't do that in the data center is because of human beings. Right?
Yeah.
Effectively, that's what it is because it's okay, what should the underlay routing protocol be in a data center? Go.
Ethernet. IP. That's it.
But what's the routing protocol? What if I'm like, and again, just by even asking that question, I'm implying that the only way to build a data center is to build with like a BGP VXLAN based overlay.
Yeah.
Except we all have these ideas, right? They basically came and said, no, thou shalt do it like this. This is how provisioning should be done. Like, what is provisioning done based on DHCP? Which DHCP option? How do I know which rack it's in? Like, there's all of these things that go into the way that from an instrumentation, these things all communicate and auto-organized. And it's possible. Like, this is, without breaking any NDAs, I spent a lot of time thinking about these things and taking into account like BMCs and out-of-band networks and being able to figure out using LODP and SSDP and how these things actually are coordinated, interrogating the network to make sure that indeed your A side is plugged into your servers are plugged into A side and B side, right? Like these simple problem statements, which for whatever reason we as an industry have ignored. Like, what are the chances that a server person is going to plug two ports into the same top of rack switch?
Impossible. Never.
Right.
Right.
That's never going to happen. We had a problem statement of what are the chances? Like, when have you ever seen in your entire career, have you ever seen the right amount of transceivers ordered for a project in a data center?
I just ordered some and we were short.
Right. And this is like, I was sitting there explaining internally to people, like, do you know how that count is achieved? And they're like, what? I'm like, well, Brent, draws a Visio diagram, and then he takes his little pen and counts the lines, hopes he gets the right number, and then hopefully adds 2. And I guarantee, like, I can tell you, what are the chances you get the right number? It's 100% you won't, because I've never seen it happen in my entire career.
So this gets back to like what you're saying, about long live SNMP. If you go out and look at NMS systems that have been around, OpenNMS is a good example. OpenNMS is literally used in live networks today, including my house, still. And it's basically algorithms that were written 15 years ago like for auto discovery, which is what you're talking about. And it does an incredibly fine job of that. As complicated a mess as auto discovery is in a network, it actually works. And so it's, I don't know. I haven't looked into the details of, HomeNet, of some of the other things that are going on today, but I'd encourage folks to go look at that sort of, kind of prior art literature, whatever we want to call it, because it still freaking works, and it's a
Assuming the
pretty
instrumentation
problem.
is there, right? Pre-LLDP days, it
Yep.
is amazing the things that people went through and did. Like,
I mean, it's total
and
gymnastics, right? To
I
make
was
that work.
I was lucky enough to work with people, Les Stewart and Chris Linzel, Dave, that these guys worked on some of like the Cabletron NMS stuff. Like all
Yep.
like CDP was like a twinkling in somebody's eye at this point. And they went through and did like really interesting things. Like I'm going to go look at the entire bridge MIB, and I'm going to look at the bridge table of a switch, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to identify particular ports that had more than one MAC address in it from an ARP perspective.
Yeah.
So even if it's not a trunk port, I can then infer in those days, like who would have thought you would ever have more than one MAC address on a single port, right? So nowadays the logic is questionable, but there's all these tricks that they kind of bring all that stuff together and being able to put together like real network topologies, like automatically generating a somewhat accurate topology.
That are accurate, right? That's the trick. It's
unbelievable, but it's like that as a problem statement is crazy.
Discover all. I mean that's it. I mean that's a very simple problem statement. Discover all the items on the network. Period.
Do that for me, please.
Go forth and think about this now for the next 3 weeks, folks, because it's a hard problem. There are a lot of insidious corner cases, and this gets into the HomeNet stuff. That this is what used to drive me bananas about the home stuff, is that home stuff should be dead simple. You should plug it in and work it. But I guess Tucker's question, point too, but why not data centers too? Why is that?
That's why. Like we've always facilitated choice throughout the entire standardization project. You can do it route this way, or you can route that way, or you can have this many links, or you can bond them, or you can not bond them, or you can ECMP, or you can't ECMP, or you can fabric, or you can fabric this way, or you can trill. Like we've always wanted to facilitate that rather than just saying that fabric works.
I love SPB. Come on.
No, yeah, sorry, I didn't give SPB any love.
So what hardware do you recommend for somebody that hasn't done anything with it because they haven't found time myself?
It depends what you're optimizing for, right, and what you're trying to achieve. Like, if you just want, one of the most common things where people complain about in this space is if you get smart bulbs, and then your family comes behind you and turns a light switch off, and they break your network. Right, so go get like Lutron. If you want to optimize for the rest of the family's experience, like Lutron light switches is one of the most rock solid things I've ever seen in my life. Like these things are phenomenal. But it depends what you're doing, right? I am currently at the point where I've got upwards of 80 plants instrumented in my house. Yes, you heard that right, plants. So I've got.
Oh, for a minute, I thought you were talking about a manufacturing facility. You mean like green things that are growing?
No, I mean green things that are growing. So this is a BLE-based plant sensor, which has, I don't know if you can see that at the end, but it's actually got a lux sensor on it. It's got temperature, humidity, conductivity. So I plug these in, and they're all BLE-based, which is a pain in the ass in homes because of RF and walls, wandering sacks of water.
Yep.
And so I hit a scale problem where I can take those and then bind them to an ESP32 instance. So I've got, this is like any good, geek's desk. I've got these all over the place at this point. So I can put a total of about 13 or 14, depending on the ESP instance, and I've got to bind those to these things, bring these all back into a Home Assistant server, where I then take that and then bind them together around specific plant profiles, so I can tell you that my spider plants are high or low on the conductivity, or like I don't wonder when things have to be watered anymore. I get notifications on my phone.
Yeah, you just told and you can even automate that. That can just be the trigger to enable to turn on watering. Turn on
I
your.
could, but as someone who has gone through the experience of what it's like to have large amounts of water in places you didn't expect it, I prefer to keep the watering as a manual process.
Maybe outside, but yeah, not in your house. Maybe outside.
Yeah.
I actually have that set up here without the sensors, but the auto watering thing it's one of those things too. It's like turning off the lights, You save, by the way, I forgot to mention the automating the lights. I did this math a bunch of years ago. I don't know, it was about 4 years ago. I replaced all the lights with LEDs and motion sensors. And I think we tracked the power bill because they have a historic thing you can do here. And it was over 50% savings on all of that.
And the ROI is amazing.
And auto watering too. Like everything gets watered, everything is green. And I don't even notice, but it's only on for an hour a day if it needs to be. I don't have to think about that at all. It just works.
And honestly, as I get older, being able to offload cognitive tasks like remembering when to water is kind of awesome. I just get a notification and it lets me know whether they need fertilizer or not. I can take that into account. I can take in, like, I never have to yell at my kids to turn off the lights or turn off the power. Like, that's taken care of. It's not perfect yet, but the more that you do, like, it just seems like I'm just a happier, more zen person.
Right. What have I been doing all this time? It's like the thing with the lights. It's like Star Trek at my house. You just walk into the room and the light comes on, and then you walk out of the room, and then if there, I don't know what it is, a 5-minute lag or whatever, goes off. Nobody even thinks about it around here anymore. I mean, there's a good friend of mine. He runs the Energy Star stuff here for the local power company, and he came over the first time I had this all set up, and he was like, "This is what I'm trying to get everybody to do. This is how it's supposed to work."
on that note, Tom, Chris, if people want to become more zen, they want to invest in this. I think you've got a YouTube channel, which might be a good place for them to maybe pick up some advice, tutorials.
So I've got, I think it's the channel's like Chris Young Smart Home or something like that, because I got stuck in YouTube. I made a bad decision once upon a time, and by the time you're in, sometimes you're in. I have the webpage, which is HomeKit Geek, which whenever I publish anything, I was all in on HomeKit, and I've kind of now started to move more and more over to Home Assistant, mostly for historical trending. Right, like the problem with HomeKit, the problem with Amazon, the problem with Google, in my particular view, right? This is my opinion, is there's no historical, right? Which is that's what I wanted to be able to do, is to look over energy tracking. I want to be able to. I would love to get to the point where I can predict when I'm going to need to water plants in advance. Right, so I've got as a parent, I've got all the air quality stuff, and so I am trying to get to the point where. And the tech is finally here, and now I need to start working on the machine learning part of it, of training the algorithms. How many plants do I need in a room to get CO2 neutral and get VOCs out? So how do I incorporate the plant side of air quality in a house? Right, if there's anything we learned in the last couple of years of this pandemic, it's air matters. Right, so how do I improve that for myself, for my family? Cognitive ability, just, when you're working in a room at 12, when the CO2 hits about 1200, it is actually proven that our cognitive ability to make decisions is significantly decreased.
Well, here's another one too, is that another thing to leave you with to work on. Not all of these LED light bulbs that are out there today are going to last 30 years or whatever they say on the package. I mean, I've had so many fail over time. It would be really great to know when or if they failed, I mean, because that's another thing, like, when some of these like outdoor lights or outer regions or especially lights that are way up high, it's better for the thing to tell you that it's not working if you can than to climb up and have to do it. All of these, like, things like that. Keep working on those. That's really interesting and useful.
For sure.
So to answer your question, Dave, HomeKitGeek.com. That's also the Twitter. I've also still got the Netman Chris, which I flow back and forth between them. And yeah, it's anybody's got any questions, I'd be more than happy to share what I've learned and a lot of the mistakes that I've made along the way.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Chris. You have been a wonderful guest. I feel like we've definitely been much more enlightened on the smart home stuff, and we look forward to hopefully having you back again in the future.
Absolutely. It's been too long, guys.
Thanks for being
on. Sure.